Today we're going to talk about why cells are so small, and the goal of this video is to explain how surface area and volume of a cell affects the size of the cell. So, what exactly do cells need to survive? Well, cells need to produce ATP. That's a usable form of energy for the cell. They need that energy in order to survive. And the process of producing ATP requires the cell to exchange materials with the environment that it's in. For example, sugar, like glucose and oxygen, go into the cell, carbon dioxide goes out of the cell, and water can diffuse in and out. These are examples of materials that are being exchanged between the cell and its environment. Now, larger cells need more energy than smaller cells to survive. That's going to be really crucial. Larger cells need more energy than smaller cells to survive. So, now let's talk about what factors affect the rate at which cells exchange materials with the environment that they're in. It turns out that the surface area and the volume of the cell affects how fast the cell can exchange materials with the environment. Now, surface area is a measurement of the cell's outer layer. That's the cell membrane. In this picture, it's that layer on the outer edge that's in dark blue. So that's what surface area is measuring, the cell's outer layer, the cell membrane. Volume, on the other hand, is a measurement of the space inside the cell. So everything else you see inside the cell, that's part of its volume, the measurement of space inside the cell. Okay, so that tells you what surface area is and what volume is in this case. But now let's talk about what those mean, how those factors affect the rate of exchange between the materials from outside the cell and inside the cell. All right, so starting with surface area. An increase in surface area means that more materials can move in and out of the cell. So if a cell has a larger surface area, then more materials can move in and out of it. If a cell has smaller surface area, then less materials can move in and out of it. What about volume? Well, a larger volume means that the cell, it requires more time for the cell to take in materials and those materials to reach all the parts of the cell. I'll say that again because that might not have been super clear. The larger the volume of the cell, the more time it takes for materials to reach all the parts within the cell. The lower the volume, the less time it takes for materials to reach all the parts of the cell. Okay, so those are the factors that affect the rate of exchange, surface area and volume, and I told you what a larger and smaller surface area does and what a larger or smaller volume does. So how exactly do surface area and volume, specifically the ratio between the two, how does that limit the size of the cell? Well, here's the big idea. Large cells have small surface area to volume ratios. And here's what that means. If a cell has a small surface area to volume ratio, then that cell is going to be slow at meeting its energy needs. So it needs energy to survive, but it's going to be really slow at getting the energy that it needs. Now, why is that? Well, since it has a larger volume, that means it needs more energy to survive. And that larger volume also means that it takes more time for the materials it needs to reach all of the parts within the cell. So if a cell is really slow at meeting its energy needs and it needs that energy in order to survive, then that cell is going to tend not to survive for very long. But what about small cells? Well, small cells have large surface area to volume ratios. And what exactly does that mean? That cell is going to be fast at meeting its energy needs. Now, why is that? Well, the smaller volume means it needs less energy to survive, and it's going to take less time for the materials it needs to reach all the parts within it. So if the cell is able to meet its energy needs very quickly, then that cell tends to survive. So based on this slide, you can see that large cells are going to tend not to survive, but small cells do tend to survive. And it comes down to how fast or how slow they are at meeting their energy needs. But how fast or how slow they are at meeting those energy needs depends on their surface area to volume ratio. So how do you calculate the surface area to volume ratio for a cell? Well, here's how you calculate surface area. You take the number of sides times the length times the width. That's the case with a cube, at least, and we're going to work with cubic cells that are shaped like cubes in this case. So a cube has 6 sides. So when you're working surface area problems with these cells that are shaped like cubes, you're going to the number of sides is going to be 6. What about volume? You calculate volume by multiplying the length times the width times the height. Okay, so let's practice this. I have 2 cells on the screen. One is large, one is small. Let's figure out the surface area and volume for each, and then we'll put them in a ratio. For this larger cell, there are 6 sides times the length is 5, and with a cube, every side is an equal length. So if I know one side, I know them all. So the other side is going to be 5 as well. So 6 times 5 times 5 is 150. Okay. What about the cell's volume? Well, each side is 5 millimeters. So 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. If you were to put this in a ratio, it would be 150 to 125. You can simplify that. Kind of think of it like a fraction that you can simplify. You can simplify it down to 6 to 5 ratio. That would be the ratio. Okay, now let's look at the smaller cell. The surface area, there's 6 sides of the cube times each side is 2. So 6 times 2 times 2 will be 24. What about the volume? Every side is 2. So 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. That gives me a ratio of 24 to 8, which we can simplify to 3 to 1. So which ratio is bigger and which ratio is smaller? Well, the larger cell, I'm sorry, I wrote that backwards. The larger cell has the smaller ratio, and the smaller cell has the larger ratio. And what that means is a cell that's got a larger ratio is going to tend to survive better.